Hello there and welcome to our first daily briefing for the new week. I'm J.R. Lewis. Glad to have you with us on either KLAM or KCDV, or perhaps you're hearing this on YouTube. In any case, we are pleased to bring these to you Monday through Friday in the 1 p.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m. hours, and also youtube.com/Cordova TV. We're pleased to have Mayor Koplin with us to start off with a conversation about a number of issues, economic, these new kind of larger numbers we saw over the weekend, and even a little about the census. So that's up next for you on today's Daily Briefing. Mayor Koplin, nice to be starting the week with you here again, and I'm wondering, after a few days, How are we feeling about Cordova's response? What are some of the things that you're conversing with people about, and I don't know, just sort of issues in general as this continues?
You bet. Well, as of Friday, we got our test results, and we don't have any new active cases in Cordova. We're up over 720 tests administered, and the one positive that we had is recovered. So our testing protocols continued to be a real important part of our overall response, and I feel good about where we're at. I had a chance to wander around the industrial core down by the seafood processing plants this weekend and in and out of some of the stores as needed. And traffic seems to be a little lighter than usual in the businesses, and people were following the masking requirements. Down in the industrial core, I noticed there was an announcement on Friday that the road closures down around the Jim Port Fill were in effect. They were finally implemented. And I did notice as I drove down in that area that employees were all staying inside the fenced areas, and they had quite a bit more room to move around and socialize internally, and so that's good. And then we've had, of course, the picnic last week with Ocean Beauty that the City and Forest Service collaborated on to get their employees off site, get some exercise, and go see some of our beautiful scenery. So I think our plans are going well. I did have a few conversations over the weekend about various concerns.
Well, you mentioned that business is down, and we've got to be thinking to some extent about those that are involved in the travel industry. What are you hearing about, are visitors coming, or what's happening there?
Well, of course, most of our visitors' accommodations especially have been closed, and then the restaurants. Some have started to gradually reopen. Some haven't yet. So the bookings for the fall season, August and September, which is a big part of the overall revenue season, I talked to that was one conversation this weekend, one fairly substantial accommodations, and they said that they're expecting between a fourth and a third of their usual visitors. Various reasons. The economy is down. Some people have just changed their plans. Some are concerned and frustrated with the testing requirements and what they feel are somewhat onerous travel restrictions and uncertainty on what those restrictions might look like in 6 to 8 weeks. And so the businesses are really feeling the financial impacts and are encouraging reopening to the largest extent that we can, and also some signaling, maybe just a real simple summary of the current requirements so that our lodge owners and so forth can share that with their clients.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is that it presents challenges for people concerned on sort of both sides of it. Dr. Zink, who you obviously know very well and who's been very enthusiastic about Cordova's response, was talking about the big jump in cases over the weekend, 38 total, with I think it was 29 Saturday and 9 on Sunday, and her quote was, "The more time we spend with each other, the more we mix, the more people that are in our mix, as well as the more travel we have, the more we will expect cases." And actually, all three of the out-of-state cases discovered on Sunday, she says, were people coming in from outside to work in the seafood industry. So how is that? I mean, you speak with the folks there in the industry fairly often. Are you still feeling pretty confident about these plans?
You know, I am. We're definitely well into the second wave, I would call, of seafood workers coming in. And I saw a tremendous amount of seine boat and tender activity in the harbor. I think as the Copper River fishery has been so slow, people gear up for seining. So I think we had well over 100 new seafood workers come into town last week. And in our industry meeting on Friday, which is a collaboration between the processors, our marketing association, CDFU, hosted by Heather Brannon from the incident management team, and I participated as well. There is an influx, but those protocols are in place. You know, most of those workers arrived on a private plane. They're implementing testing, distancing. So with more people, there is more chance. But still, there were some questions about what about the people who work at the processing plants who live in the community. There's real good isolating protocols in place for the work site, daily temperature checks and health protocols. Again, health nurses on site at some of the larger processors. So I recognize that there have been some new cases, but again, there's real broad testing happening. And I hope that those cases work out for some of the other communities like ours did, where the very protocols we have in place is what identifies and isolates those workers before it spreads and causes a bubble or worse yet, an outbreak. The Whittier case has kind of been the bad direction it can go. Our case and hopefully others will be essentially the plan working. And it is going to turn up active cases periodically. So I still feel good about the continued vigilance of our incident management team, of our processors and partners in the community, and where we're going, just need to remain vigilant.
Yeah. Well, and you see, you just highlighted the double-edged sword there, is that the reason they find these cases, the seafood industry workers, for example, that were singled out by Doctors Inc., is the reason that they discover them and why the number of them rises is because of how vigilant they're being with the testing. The question then becomes, are those people being isolated as our local processors have plans to do and kept from creating a situation where then people that live in the communities are able to start spreading it to one another. And certainly for Cordova that hasn't been the case. And it sounds again like our testing assets are pretty good. Something else before we run out of time here that I saw in the latest newsletter that the city put out had to do with the census, and obviously that is a thing that's been all goofed up because of the pandemic too. The what do they call them? The people that go out and actually physically do it, auditors or whatever, not able to do that the way that it was supposed to happen. They actually delayed the deadline to be able to turn it in and still have it count. But, in the midst of everything going on, major national issues, still in the middle of a pandemic, there may be people thinking, I just don't want to deal with that. What kind of an impact would it have if Cordova doesn't do a good job responding?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. And I don't know that I would go so far as to say disastrous, but it will have deep, deep implications. All the foundation formulas from the federal government and the state government that determine our educational funding, a lot of the programs that they roll out are based on overall population, of course, and also demographics. And Alaska is lagging. We are now the 50th state in per capita reporting. So we are the worst so far. And arguably, it's more important for Alaska than any other state listening to Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan, they are extremely concerned because they understand the implications and are really redoubling their efforts through their town halls on Thursday afternoons and their communications with the state that it's really a priority. And it should be not only for our city, but for the whole state. With our very rural population, we stand to lose the most if we don't accurately, account for the number of the citizens and makeup and demographics and so forth. So really critical, and it is going to require some extra steps. I got my census form as a door hanger from someone delivering them on a bicycle. That used to be, if I remember 10 years ago, a face-to-face where they would actually walk you through and the questions and fill them out right there on the spot. So it's going to take a little more effort on ours. We may even want to consider a workshop or some sort of assistance. I know the Legislative Information Office typically helps with things like that, but we may want to look at some additional resources and perhaps some even census ambassadors to help people fill those out and get them submitted.
Well, and we did it online this year, and it really is. They talk about 10 questions that take 10 minutes, and it really it didn't take any time at all. So anyone with internet access can go. What is it? 2020census.gov, I think, with the numbers 20. Yeah, here it is in the letter. 2020census.gov. You can just point and click and get it done pretty easily. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of, I've heard a lot of folks at the state and local level talk about how important this is, and you would certainly seem to be affirming that. So anything else before we wrap it up?
No, just now that you mention it, and as I say, hire ambassadors and so forth, City Hall's being very, very careful with expenditures in our budget. We recognize it in the same way businesses are struggling, our revenues are down. So as I get comments about things like the washing stations and the harbor and various things that may or may not be getting various levels of use, we did get a lot of CARES Act funding to the city, and it's pretty restrictive what that can be used for, and it has to be directed specifically to the pandemic response. So if it looks to the public like we're maybe spending a little more or taking steps or precautions that might put some pressure on the city budget, it isn't city operating revenues that are paying for those items. In fact, we're specifically prohibited from using CARES Act funding for city operations. So that's part of what's going on, and we're doing some things like carpeting and removing carpeting in Bedarkie and putting easily cleaned surfaces and other upgrades in the swimming pool and so forth that take advantage of the CARES Act funding and take care of some issues that help us going forward that aren't necessarily hitting the city coffers or our operating budgets. Sure. So I thought I'd just kind of finish with that as a...
Well, no, that's a good point. And I mean, I've watched council for decades, and you'll see that happen a lot where people will come in and say, why are we fixing all these roads instead of investing more in the schools or something? And the answer is, well, because the money to fix the roads comes from a state or federal source that can only be spent to fix roads. It would be illegal to take that money and spend it somewhere else. And that's been very clear. If anybody's been watching how the CARES Act works, that cities or states will get in a lot of trouble if they don't use CARES money for COVID-related stuff. They end up having to pay it back, and I don't know if there are penalties, but yeah, I mean, it's a real good point. So I guess we'll see what tomorrow brings, and until then, we wish you the best.
That was great. Thank you.
All right, thanks again to Mayor Koplin for joining us. Remember, by the way, to get current and voluminous information, the best asset is the city's COVID website, covid19.cityofcordova.net. There's also the phone number 424-INFO that you can call to talk to somebody, leave comments, get questions answered on a variety of things. And then 424-WELL is out there for you. That's provided by the Village of Eac and has a recorded message with the latest details. A reminder again, testing is available at the Village of Eac, the Alaka Clinic specifically, which is there on 2nd Street, and that's Monday and Wednesday from 1 to 3, and then CCMC does testing from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. These programs will continue on weekdays, 1 p.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m. hours on the radio. Archived to youtube.com/Cordova TV if you can't tune in at one of those times, would like them on demand, or if you would like to share them elsewhere. We're glad you could join us. We'll get back to regular programming now on the Clam and the Eagle.